What's good, Yugioh? It's my voice back in this video. A lot of people have been asking, how the heck do you hand trap this format? Because post Phantom Nightmare, the power level of the game is just insane. Not one hand trap will stop your entire opponent, and you have to kind of, pick and choose your battles when you want to drop your hand trap. So without further ado, let's dive in and talk about how to hand trap the newer decks that are coming out in Phantom Nightmare. Now, starting off, let's talk about DROLL and Lockbird. There's not much to be said here. Generally, you're going to activate this on the first thing that your opponent uses. Yeah, this one's pretty easy. I mean, for example, if my opponent started off with Bonfire and, they search for something like Snake Eyes Ash, then yeah, we're just going to go ahead and drop the DROLL on the resolution and hope that that's enough that they pass their turn. Now, half the time it's not, because this is the type of card that's very high variance and it depends on how your opponent opened, and then you have to deal with some hand traps on the crackback. But, DROLL and Lockbird, I think it's needless to be said. Just use it whenever you can. You cannot use it during the draw phase, so if your opponent uses Wanted during the draw phase, not much you can do there, but any other time at the game, just drop the DROLL immediately. What about Ash Blossom? Well, personally, I think Ash Blossom should be reserved specifically for the original Sinful Spoils, so they cannot actually bridge off into the Fire King engine if they're playing Fire King. But there are some ways that can diversify. For example, if they're going for the Snake Eye Ash into Appaloosa play, which for those of you guys that don't know, you can actually go directly into the Appaloosa before using the original by sequencing your moves a specific way. That does require them to actually make it pretty immediately obvious. Now, instead of going into Link Reboot, what they're actually going to do here after adding the original Sinful Spoils is that they're going to actually tribute off the Snake Eye Ash as well as the Populace instead of going into Link Reboot. Now, anytime you see that happen, I would Ash Blossom immediately, just because it will go off into the Snake Eye Oak and then eventually into an Appaloosa, which is going to be able to negate your Ash. So that's the one time that I would use Ash preemptively. I don't generally like using it on Bonfire or Snake Eye Ash's effect. Sometimes you might use it on the Send effect, but generally you probably want to wait for them to actually use the original Sinful Spoils and then drop the Ash, so that way you're guaranteeing that they're not actually going to bridge off either into the Fire King engine, or in the case of Pure Snake Eye, into Oak to extend their plays, right? So that's just really, really important. Yeah, just wait for original if you can against Fire King, because them not getting into the Fire King engine is important. They're not going to be able to access Garunix, nor into their broken plays with Kieran. So this is what I would Ash. They're still going to be able to get a board, but this is just how you can get the maximum quality of potential. Unfortunately, Hida does kind of hurt here, but this is the best you can do in my opinion. Next, let's talk about NIBIRU. This is a hard one because there are a lot of ways that you can just play NIBIRU and it does nothing, especially when they have Flamberg Dragon on the field, which most players are going to do to insulate against Nib. Because if we NIBIRU here, this is something like what the Fire King board is after they resolve Garunix and they used Kieran to bring back the Ponix, right? So if we Nib here, what happens is they're going to be able to trigger the Flamberg to get 2 level 1 bodies on the board. And with the token, they can still link climb into Princess, and then that makes sure that they have the Ambler Whale plus Princess in Graveyard. So personally, I like to nib at the choke points where the Flamberg is already triggered and after they've already used the effective Princess, because if they don't, generally players play 2 Princesses. So if we Nibiru them and they're still able to go to Princess, and they're still going to have the Ambler Whale combo, right? So what you can actually do from here is see what they do. There are a couple of different lines. I know some players like to go into the Sunlight Wolf here, and then from the Sunlight Wolf, they'll actually link off into the Princess with the Sunlight Wolf and then resurrect it back off of the Princess. So that way you're getting maximum link climb value because you're getting a link 2 back with the Princess. So you'll end with an Ambler Whale plus an Appaloosa. So if they go something like this, this is potentially a spot we can Nibiru at. What happens is this would deny them from actually getting the effect of the Sunlight Wolf, because obviously they have not triggered it yet. So what would happen is we would trigger Nib here, they would lose all of their monsters, and then they would get a token plus the effect of Flamberg. But the bad thing about this is that they do actually still have some plays, right? They're still going to be able to get the bodies on board, and then what happens is they're actually going to be able to link off either into the IP Masquerena or just go into SP Little Knight, because they still have Link Karibo in the graveyard, which has not yet used the effect. So they can just do something like this, potentially either going into SP Little Knight to banish, or they just go into the IP Masquerena and then have that during your turn to play with. So instead of going to Link Karibo, they just go with the token, and then that way they also have a fire in the graveyard for the Princess to trigger, which is probably just a better play, right? So you're still kind of dealing with some semblance of a board. The other thing you can do before using Nib there is actually allow them to continue playing.
Really quickly, if you guys aren't already subscribed to the channel, definitely consider hitting that subscribe button at the bottom. It'll go a long way to support the channel. Other than that, thanks a lot for tuning in.
So we're reset back to the original position where they've just resurrected the Sunlight Wolf off of Princess. From here, generally what they do is they have to use the Flamberg to go into Ambler Whale, and this allows them to actually trigger the Sunlight Wolf as well as the Flamberg to bring back 2 level 1 bodies. And this, of course, will allow them to add back the Kirin back to the hand, so they do have some follow-up. But what you can actually do here is just immediately activate your Nibiru, and then that way it clears the entire board. So they've already triggered Sunlight Wolf as well as Princess, and they end with a token. Now, this does mean they still potentially have a play because they have the Kirin in hand, but they have to pair it with another fire monster in their hand to trigger the effect of the Garunix during our turn, and then trigger the effect of Princess later on with Garunix bodies on board. Now, the only caveat is, number one, they have to have a fire monster, and number two, they're forced to rely, everything on the combo hinges on that Kirin resolving, right? So that is really, really easy because Kirin can only be activated in the main phase, so it allows us to make things like talents live a lot easier. And then, of course, you guarantee that they, for them to have a play, they do have to have the fire monster in hand. And all things considered, they do get the Garunix back, even if they do have something, and then they get the pop. Potentially, they have the Sanctuary as well if they do play the XYZ, but I know a lot of players have cut that. And then all you're really dealing with is, I guess, the Garunix, the effect of Kirin to pop, and then the Princess in the graveyard, which you basically would have still been dealing with if you Nibiru'd on the other line, because you would have had to deal with the SP Little Knight with the Masquerena, plus the Princess coming back off of the pop of the level 1 fire monster they had, and then the fire monster triggers the Princess, so on and so forth. So really, at the end of the day, it depends on your hand, but I would Nibiru after two things. Number one, they trigger the Princess, and number two, ideally, they've triggered the Flamberg if possible. But them triggering the Princess at that choke point is the most important thing. So that just makes it less of a chance for them to end with the Ambler Will combo. So with Imperm and Baylor, there's no question in my mind that you definitely use it directly on the high impact normal summon like Snake Eyes Ash, because this stops two of the effects, the effect to add as well as the effect to send itself to summon out Oak or Flamberg Dragon, which is a 2-in-1, right? We do not want them to snowball, and Ash is one of the cards that allows them to snowball. So guys, please use your effect Baylor's Infinite Impermanence on Ash. Do not wait for anything else. There's nothing better to hit. Now, there are niche scenarios where you might want to hit a Witch. When would you want to hit a Witch with Imperm and Baylor? Well, generally, I like to do this whenever they lead with Wanted. Whenever they have access to Wanted, I'm always going to use it on the Witch, because that means that they're not going to be able to snowball. Because even if you hold the Baylor or the Imperm for when they set the original and then summon out the Ash, what happens is they still have Wanted in the graveyard, which makes it really, really annoying, because they can then use the effect to shuffle back the original Snake Eye, and then from there they get some pluses, right? They get to draw a card. So you're effectively trading your Baylor at a negative cost because you're getting that draw, right? So that's when I would always want a Baylor or Imperm the Bell Star. Personally, I would still hold it if they just go hard summon Witch without the Wanted access, because that doesn't guarantee they get the draw. Now, the other nice thing about stopping the Dark Witch is that they're not going to be able to chain the Kirin, because Kirin has to target a fire, or has to destroy a fire monster, right? So that being dark means that it's going to resolve every time. But obviously, we don't want to hold it and then they have the Wanted draw. They can just draw into additional extenders and then we're down a card, right? So personally, I like the Baylor or Imperm the Black Witch whenever they have the Wanted, because that allows them to draw a card. And then guys, what about Belle? When would you Belle? Well, Belle honestly is not a great card against Snake Eyes or Fire King. They just can play through it like butter, so I don't recommend siding it in unless you're trying to beat something like a Soul Release. But you can Belle a couple of things. You can obviously Belle the effect of the Kirin in the graveyard when they're trying to resurrect and pop something. You can Belle the effect of Garunix trying to resurrect itself from the graveyard, but not the hand. Or you can Bell something like a Snake Eyes Flamberg Dragon trying to resurrect two things back from the graveyard. You can also Bell something like a Hida as well. Those are just some options. I don't think the card is very good, but those are just some things you can Bell. And then last but not least, you can also Bell the Snake Eyes Oak effect trying to resurrect something from the graveyard. And of course, Princess, I guess, is another one that you can definitely Bell as well. All right, what about against Voiceless? For Baylor and Imperm, definitely the first normal summon that they commit to the board, because oftentimes that's like very high impact. So something like the low/no box, or if they're playing the Divine or the Herald build, that is also something to hit for sure. There are also a couple of other cards that are very high impact, have monster effects. For example, if they're playing the Dogmatica package, like the Nadir Servant stuff, potentially hitting the Dogmatica Maximus is another thing you can do. Just bear in mind that when they do have Novox as well as a Ritual Monster on the board alongside the barrier, you're actually not able to Baylor or Imperm anything. So you generally want to use these cards before they have both monsters on the field. If they go something like Tribute for the Skull Guardian and then activate the effect of Novox in the graveyard, then you might be forced to Baylor or Imperm the Skull Guardian there on the spot. Just be aware that oftentimes it's not going to resolve because they do have the Cerebus in the hand, which negates a targeting effect. So that's just like in-engine protection that they have. So just be cognizant, I think, of that, but generally using it against your first normal summon is the best thing you can do. I don't think Droll and Lockbird needs much of an explanation. You know, obviously you're just dropping it against the first ad effect that they use, and half the time it works against this deck, but half the time it doesn't, because if they are good, they can kind of play around it. But yeah, just use it against first thing. NIBIRU is generally quite bad against this deck specifically because they either don't go into 5 summons or they end with a Skull Guardian, which negates. So personally, there's not really any good chance to NIBIRU. Unless you see one, then go for it right away. I would still potentially use it to try and bait out the Skull Guardian if you have other hand traps, but oftentimes it's just dead. Ghost Spell. This should be used against the things that are high impact adding. Did you know that pre-preparation of rites can actually add from the graveyard as well? So yes, this can actually be Ghost Spelled, which is nice. Same deal with the Saphira. This card can add from the deck or the graveyard to your hand, so you can definitely bell that. Personally, I would bell the first thing that adds, because oftentimes they're trying to play around Droll and Lockbird, right? Because the existence of Droll means that certain decks have to make their first search the most high impact one. So I would always use it on pre-prep and always use it on Saphira personally. And yeah, you can also use it on the effect of Low in the graveyard to special summon herself when they do go for a ritual summon. But half the time they are going to chain block it, making the Skull Guardian chaining 2. But if they don't or they slip up, definitely use it on the no box. Other thing you can use it against is the Dynamundo, because this card tributes to special summon a ritual monster from the graveyard. So having the Ghost Spell is really, really important against the Dynamundo to make sure they don't bring stuff back. But good players will be playing around it, so just be very, very wary about that. You can also use it against Nadir's Servant, because this includes an effect to add from the graveyard or the deck to the hand, so definitely use it against Nadir. And if I remember correctly, the Authority trap card, actually, the first effect says you can shuffle a card back from your graveyard to your deck. So if they select that option, even if they wanted to shuffle from the hand, you can still bell that. So it's really important to know that. And one thing to note with this card is that if they set it and they flip it up, at that moment they choose an effect to activate. So if they actually choose the first effect to activate when it's flipped up and you bell it, it actually goes to the graveyard by game mechanics because the activation's negated. But if they leave it back on the board and then use the effect after it's resolved, then it would stay on the field. But just key thing to be aware of there. And then last but not least, Ash Blossom. Same kind of deal here. I think you just negate the high impact starters. Anything that adds that they do as their first action is always important, because remember, they're trying to play around Droll and Lockbird. So this add is definitely something that they need to start playing. So Ash Blossoming that is really, really high impact. Same thing with the Wise Silent Forcer Queen Saphira. I would do that as well. Nadir's Servant, even the Barrier, because half the time they're just trying to add like a no box to get started. Now, the one thing I don't think I would Ash personally is Pot of Prosperity, because this just digs for more starters or searchers. And I don't really like ashing that. I'd rather wait for their once per turn effects, like the high impact pre-prep or something that will actually add off the pot, and then just ash that. So those are my opinions on ash there. So guys, that was a really quick tutorial on things to hand trap for the new decks that are coming out in the Phantom Nightmare set. What do you think? Are there any other places to hand trap or any other good hand traps that we missed in this video? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.